1 year after that life-changing October morning, Lisa stood in her backyard watching Buddy chase butterflies in the afternoon sunshine. It was hard to believe how much their lives had changed since that foggy day when everything seemed so ordinary. Unpredictable. The doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. When she opened the front door, she found Rodriguez, Thompson, and William standing on her porch, all dressed in their civilian clothes and carrying a large wrapped package. "Surprise!" Rodriguez said with a big grin. "We hope you don't mind." U.S. dropping by unannounced, Lisa hugged each of them tightly. Even though they talked on the phone regularly and met for dinner once a month, seeing them always reminded her of how close they had come to never meeting at all. "We brought you something," Thompson said, gesturing to the package. "It's from all of us, plus some of the other soldiers who came forward after your story broke." Inside the wrapping was a beautiful framed photo of Buddy sitting proudly next to an American flag with an engraved plaque that read, "To Buddy and Lisa, heroes who saved lives and changed everything. With eternal gratitude from the soldiers you rescued and the ones you saved in the future." Lisa felt tears welling up in her eyes. "You guys didn't need to do this." "Yes, we did," William said firmly. "You have no idea how many lives you saved. By speaking up when you did." They sat on her back porch drinking iced tea while Buddy sprawled across all their feet, clearly happy to have his favorite humans visiting again. The men looked healthy and strong now, nothing like the skeletal figures she had found under the bridge. "How are you all doing? Really doing?" Lisa asked. She knew that physical recovery was only part of their healing process. Rodriguez was the first to answer. "The nightmares have mostly stopped. I still don't like being in small, enclosed spaces, but the counseling has helped a lot." Thompson nodded. "The military provided us with excellent psychological support. It took me a while to trust authority figures again, but I'm back to full duty and actually enjoying my work." Williams, who had been the youngest and most traumatized by the experience, smiled. "I'm doing better than I thought I would. The hardest part was feeling like we had somehow failed as soldiers. The counselors helped us understand that we were victims, not failures." Lisa was relieved to hear this. She had worried about them constantly during the first few months after the rescue, especially after learning about the long-term effects that trauma can have on people. "What about your careers?" she asked. "I was afraid that speaking out might hurt your futures in the military." "Actually, it's been the opposite," Rodriguez said. "The military has been very supportive. They've made it clear that we did the right thing by telling the truth and that soldiers who report problems or abuse will be protected." Thompson pulled out his phone and showed Lisa some photos. "I got promoted to staff sergeant last month. And Rodriguez here just got selected for a special leadership training program." Williams was beaming. "And I'm being transferred to a new base in California where I'll be working with a unit that trains other soldiers in survival skills. Real survival skills with proper safety protocols." Lisa felt proud of all three men. They had survived something terrible and come out stronger, using their experience to help make the military safer for other soldiers. "What about the investigation?" Lisa asked. "I heard that several other officers were charged besides Mitchell." Rodriguez's expression became more serious. 3 other officers at different bases were court-martialed for similar crimes. 2 of them received prison sentences, and 1 was discharged with loss of benefits. "The best part," Thompson added, "is that the military completely overhauled their training safety protocols. No soldier can be sent on any exercise now without multiple safety checks and constant communication requirements." Williams nodded enthusiastically. "They created a new position called Training Safety Officers at every base. Their only job is to make sure exercises are conducted safely and that all personnel are accounted for at all times." Lisa thought about how many future soldiers would be safer because of these changes. It made everything they had been through feel worthwhile. "There's something else we wanted to tell you," Rodriguez said, his voice becoming emotional. "The military is creating a new award for civilians who show exceptional courage in helping military personnel. It's being called the Citizen Hero Medal." Thompson continued the thought. "You're going to be the first person to receive it." The ceremony is next month at the Pentagon. Lisa was speechless. She had never expected or wanted recognition for what she did. I just did what anyone would do. No, you didn't, William said. Firmly, most people would have been intimidated into silence when the military tried to pressure you. You chose to fight for the truth even when it was scary and difficult. As the afternoon wore on, they shared stories about what had happened in their lives over the past year. Rodriguez had gotten engaged to his longtime girlfriend. Thompson had reconnected with his daughter after years of estrangement. Williams had started college classes and was thinking about becoming a teacher after his military service ended. You know what's funny? Rodriguez said, watching Buddy sniff around the garden. Before this happened, we were just 3 soldiers doing our jobs. We probably would have served our time and gotten out without ever making much of a difference. But now, Thompson continued, we've become advocates for military reform. We speak at training academies about the importance of ethical leadership. Our story is being used to educate officers about their responsibilities to their soldiers. Williams looked directly at Lisa. And it all started because you trusted your dog's instincts and had the courage to investigate when something seemed wrong. That evening, after the men had left, Lisa sat on her porch with Buddy curled up next to her. She thought about all the lives that had been changed by one morning walk that went differently than planned. Her own life had changed too. She still worked at the animal clinic, but she had also become involved with organizations that advocate for military families. She spoke at community groups about the importance of civilians supporting service members and speaking up when they see something wrong. Most importantly, she had learned that ordinary people can make extraordinary differences when they choose. Courage over comfort. The next week, Lisa received a letter that made her cry. It was from a young Marine she had never met, stationed at a base in Japan. Dear Miss Chun, the letter read, you don't know me, but I wanted to thank you for saving my life. I was scheduled to participate in a training exercise similar to the one that nearly killed Rodriguez, Thompson, and Williams. Because of the reforms that resulted from your speaking out, that exercise was canceled and redesigned with proper safety measures. I might have been the next soldier found dying under a bridge somewhere. Instead, I'm safely serving my country and looking forward to coming home to my family. Thank you for being brave enough to speak the truth. Lisa folded the letter carefully and put it in the drawer where she kept all the thank you notes she had received from soldiers and their families over the past year. That weekend, she and Buddy took their regular morning walk, but they chose a new route through the downtown park instead of the old railway bridge. The bridge held too many painful memories for everyone involved. As they walked, Lisa reflected on how much can change when we pay attention to the things that don't seem right and have the courage to act on what we discover. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply refuse to walk away when someone needs help. Buddy trotted ahead on his leash, nose to the ground, alert to all the interesting smells and sounds around them. Lisa smiled, knowing that if her dog ever acted strangely again during one of their walks, she would definitely pay attention. After all, you never know when an ordinary morning might become the beginning of something extraordinary. Jake tightened his grip on Rebecca's arm as they got closer to the saloon doors. She could smell whiskey on his breath and see the mean look in his bloodshot eyes. Boole was breathing heavy beside her, clearly excited about dragging her inside where nobody could see what they planned to do. Please, Rebecca said one more time, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. I don't want any trouble. Just let me go to the boarding house. Trouble? Jake laughed, showing his yellow teeth. We ain't looking for trouble, sweet thing. We're just being neighborly. Every new lady in town gets the full Cedar Ridge welcome at the Silver Dollar. Boole nodded eagerly. That's right. All the girls love it once they get inside, you'll see. Rebecca's mind raced as she tried to think of a way out. She could scream, but the few people still on the street were already pretending not to see what was happening. She could try to run, but these men were bigger and stronger than her. Her heavy traveling dress would slow her down, and they would catch her before she made it 10 steps. The swinging doors of the saloon were now just a few feet away. Through the gaps, she could see the dark interior filled with cigarette smoke and hear the rough voices of the men inside. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst right out of her chest. "You know what?" Jake said, stopping suddenly. "Before we go inside, maybe our new friend here should know what kind of place the Silver Dollar really is." He turned Rebecca around so she was facing the saloon. "See, this ain't just any regular drinking establishment. We got card games that run all night long. We got dancing girls who know how to show a man a real good time. And we got rooms upstairs for when folks want to get to know each other real." Well, Rebecca felt sick to her stomach. She had heard whispered stories about places like this, but she had never imagined she would find herself being dragged into one. "I understand you think you're being friendly," she said, her voice shaking. "Now? But I really can't go in there. It wouldn't be proper." Boole laughed so loud that spit flew out of his mouth. "Proper? Lady, you ain't in Boston anymore? Out here, we do things different. Out here, when Jake Morrison wants to buy a pretty lady a drink, she says, 'Thank you,' and comes along nice and quiet." So the tall man's name was Jake Morrison. Rebecca tried to remember if she had heard that name in any of the letters from the town council, but her mind was too scattered to think clearly. All she knew was that these men had a reputation that made other people afraid to help her. "Besides," Jake added, "it ain't like you got anywhere else to go. Mrs. Henderson that runs the boarding house, she don't take in ladies who cause trouble in the street. Word gets around fast in a small town like this. You make a scene now, and you might find yourself sleeping under the stars tonight." This was exactly what Rebecca had been afraid of. She was completely alone in a strange place, with no money to get back home and nowhere else to turn. These men seemed to know that, and they were using it against her. "Look around," Boole said, waving his free hand at the nearly empty street. "You see anybody coming to help you?" "That's because everybody in this town knows better than to mess with Jake Morrison and Boole Henley. We've been here longer than most of these folks, and we got friends who don't like it when people interfere with our business." Rebecca looked around desperately, hoping to see someone, anyone who might be willing to step in. But the few people still visible had their heads down and were walking quickly in the other direction. Even the shopkeepers had gone inside their stores and closed their doors. An old woman sweeping her porch caught Rebecca's eye for just a moment. Rebecca tried to silently plead for help, but the woman just shook her head sadly and went back inside her house. The message was clear. In Cedar Ridge, Jake Morrison and Boole Henley did whatever they wanted, and nobody was going to stop them. "See?" Jake said, noticing the woman's reaction. "Even old Mrs. Patterson knows better than to stick her nose where it don't belong. Now come on, we've wasted enough time talking. The boys inside are probably wondering what's taking us so long." They started pulling her toward the doors again. Rebecca tried one more time to break free, but it was no use. She was about to be dragged into that terrible place, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Just then, she heard something that made her heart jump with hope. Horse hooves were getting closer, and they were moving fast. Someone was riding hard down the main street, heading straight toward them. Jake and Boole heard it too. They stopped pulling and turned to see who was coming. A man on horseback was approaching at a steady gallop, dust flying up behind him. Even from a distance, Rebecca could tell this wasn't just another drunk cowboy looking for trouble. This man sat straight in his saddle and rode with purpose. "Who the hell is that?" Boole muttered, squinting in the afternoon sun. Jake shrugged. But Rebecca noticed his grip on her arm loosened just a little. Probably just some drifter passing through. "He'll keep riding once he sees we're busy." But the rider didn't keep going. Instead, he slowed his horse to a walk and started coming directly toward them. As he got closer, Rebecca could see he was older than Jake and Boole, maybe in his 30s, with weather-beaten skin and calm eyes that seemed to take in everything. At once, his clothes were dusty from traveling, but they were good quality. His hat was worn but well cared for. Most importantly, he wore a gun belt with a pistol that looked like it had been used before. This was clearly a man who knew how to handle himself. The stranger stopped his horse about 20 feet away and looked the situation over carefully. His eyes went from Jake to Boole to Rebecca, taking in her torn dress and frightened face. When He saw his scattered papers blowing around in the dust. His jaw tightened slightly. "Afternoon," he said in a calm voice that somehow carried clearly across the distance. "Beautiful day for a ride." Jake straightened up, trying to look tough. "Yeah. It is. You just passing through, mister?" The stranger didn't answer right away. Instead, he swung down from his horse with an easy motion that showed years of practice. He tied his reins to a nearby post and walked closer, his boots making soft sounds in the dirt. "Actually," he said, "I was planning to stop here for a while. Maybe get some supplies, rest my horse? But it looks like you folks are having some kind of disagreement." Boole stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "Ain't no disagreement. We're just showing this young lady some hospitality. Taking her for a drink at the Silver Dollar." The stranger's eyes went to Rebecca's face, and she saw something there that gave her hope. Unlike everyone else in this town, this man didn't look afraid of Jake Morrison and Boole Henley. He looked like someone who had seen plenty of trouble before and wasn't worried about seeing a little more. The stranger walked closer with slow, steady steps. Rebecca noticed he kept his hands relaxed at his sides, but something about the way he moved reminded her of a mountain cat she had once seen, calm on the surface but ready to spring into action at any moment. "Hospitality," the man repeated, like he was tasting the word. "That's real nice of you boys. Though from where I'm standing it looks like the lady might not be too eager for that kind of hospitality." Jake's face darkened. He didn't like having his business questioned by some stranger who had just ridden into town. "Listen here, mister. This ain't none of your concern. We was here first, and we're just being friendly to the new schoolteacher." "Schoolteacher?" The stranger's eyebrows went up slightly. He looked at Rebecca again, this time noticing the scattered papers that were still blowing around in the dust. "Well, now that changes things. A teacher deserves respect in any decent town." Boole let out a harsh laugh. "Respect? She ain't even started teaching yet. Right now she's just another pretty face who needs to learn how things work around here." The stranger bent down and picked up one of Rebecca's papers. It was a letter from the Boston School Board recommending her for the teaching position. He read it quickly, then looked up at her with something that might have been approval. "Miss Rebecca Carter," he said, reading her name from the letter. "Says here you graduated top of your class from the Boston Women's Teaching College. That's mighty impressive." Rebecca felt a tiny spark of hope. This was the first person in Cedar Ridge who had spoken to her like she was a human being instead of just something to be grabbed and pushed around. "Thank you," she managed to say. Jake stepped forward, his patience running thin. "Real touching story, but we ain't got all day. The lady's coming with us whether she wants to or not. So why don't you just climb back on that horse and ride on out of here before you get yourself into trouble?" The stranger folded Rebecca's letter carefully and held it out to her. As she reached for it, he spoke quietly so only she could hear. "Ma'am, do you want to go with these gentlemen?" "No," Rebecca whispered back. "Please help me." The stranger nodded slightly and handed her the letter. Then he straightened up and looked at Jake and Boole with eyes that had suddenly gone very cold. "Well, boys, seems like we got ourselves a problem. The lady says she doesn't want to go with you." "Too bad for her," Boole growled. "And too bad for you if you think you're going to stop us." "You don't know who you're messing with, stranger." "Actually, I think I got a pretty good idea," the man replied calmly. "I've met plenty of men like you in my travels. Men who think being bigger and meaner gives them the right to push folks around. Usually doesn't end well for them." Jake's hand moved slightly toward the gun on his hip. "Is that some kind of threat?" "Just an observation," the stranger said, "based on experience." The tension in the air was so thick you could almost cut it with a knife. Rebecca found herself holding her breath, afraid that any sudden movement might set off whatever was building between these men. The street had gone completely quiet except for the sound of wind blowing through the wooden buildings. "You know—" "What?" Jake said suddenly, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "I think you need to learn some manners. Around here, we don't take kindly to strangers who stick their noses where they don't belong." "And around here," Boole added, cracking his knuckles, "we got our own ways of teaching lessons to folks who don't listen." The stranger looked from one to the other, then back again. Rebecca could see him sizing them up, figuring out what kind of fight he might be walking into. Jake was tall and probably quick with a gun, but he looked like the type who relied more on intimidation than actual skill. Bull was big and strong, but slow, the kind of man who won fights by overpowering people rather than outthinking them. "Tell you what," the stranger said finally. "I can see you boys are used to getting your way around here, but I'm going to make you a different kind of offer." "What kind of offer?" Jake asked suspiciously. "The kind where you let the lady go on her way to the boarding house, and I don't have to embarrass you in front of the whole town," Bull laughed, but it sounded forced. "Embarrass us? Mister, I could break you in half with my bare hands." "Maybe you could," the stranger agreed, "but you'd have to catch me first. And between you and me, I don't think you're near as fast as you think you are." This was clearly not going the way Jake had expected. Most people in Cedar Ridge either ran away or gave in when faced with him and Bull. This stranger was doing neither. Instead, he was standing there calm as could be, talking like he held all the cards. "Look," Jake said, trying a different approach. "We don't want no trouble with you. You seem like a reasonable man." "Why don't? You just walk away and let us handle our business? There's plenty of other ladies in town if you're looking for company." "I appreciate the offer," the stranger replied, "but I'm afraid I can't do that. See, where I come from, men don't force ladies to do things they don't want to do. Call it old-fashioned, but that's just how I was raised." Rebecca felt tears starting in her eyes, but for the first time since getting off the stagecoach, they were tears of relief rather than fear. Someone was finally standing up for her. Someone was treating her like she mattered. "Where exactly do you come from?" Bull asked, suddenly curious. "You talk like you've seen some action." The stranger pushed back his coat slightly, revealing a worn badge pinned to his vest. Rebecca couldn't read what it said from where she stood, but she could see the look of surprise that crossed both men's faces. "Name's Thomas Cole," he said quietly. "I used to be a Texas Ranger down south. These days I mostly drive cattle from ranch to ranch, but old habits die hard. I still don't like seeing innocent folks get pushed around." Jake and Bull exchanged glances. Everyone knew about the Texas Rangers. They were the toughest lawmen in the West, trained to handle everything from cattle rustlers to bank robbers. Even retired Rangers were not men to take lightly. "Now that don't change nothing," Jake said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. "Ranger or not, you're just one man. And this is our town." "Your town?" Thomas looked around at the empty street. "Funny thing about that, I don't see your name on any of these buildings. Matter of fact, I don't see anybody at all who looks happy about what you boys are doing." He was right. The few people who had been brave enough to peek out their windows were watching the confrontation with expressions that clearly showed they were rooting for the stranger. Jake Morrison and Bull Henley might rule Cedar Ridge through fear, but that didn't mean people liked them. "Besides," Thomas continued, his hand moving to rest casually on his gun belt, "I wouldn't say I'm just one man. Smith and Wesson here have been keeping me company for quite a few years now. They're real reliable friends." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Jake and Bull were facing a man who knew how to use the weapon on his hip, and they were starting to realize that this situation might not go their way after all. The mention of Smith and Wesson made both Jake and Bull shift uncomfortably. Everyone in the West knew what that meant. Thomas wasn't just carrying any old gun, he was talking about a real shooter's weapon, the kind that separated professionals from amateurs. Jake tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out hollow. "You think that fancy badge and a big reputation scare us? This ain't Texas, Ranger. Out here you ain't got no authority." "You're absolutely right," Thomas said, his voice staying calm and steady. "I got no legal authority here at all. But sometimes a man doesn't need a badge to do what's right. Sometimes he just needs to be willing to stand up when nobody else will." Rebecca watched the exchange with growing hope. For the first time since stepping off that stagecoach, she felt like someone was truly on her side. Thomas Cole wasn't just talking big. Everything about him suggested he had the skills to back up his words. Bull was getting agitated. He wasn't used to having to think this much during a confrontation. Usually his size was enough to end any argument before it really started. "I'm getting tired of all this talking," he growled. Why don't we settle this like men? That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say, Thomas replied. But before we do anything permanent, I want to give you boys one last chance to walk away. Let the lady go about her business, and we can all pretend this never happened. Jake's face was turning red with anger and embarrassment. People were watching from windows and doorways now, waiting to see if the famous Jake Morrison was going to back down from some drifter. His reputation in Cedar Ridge depended on never showing weakness, never letting anyone challenge his authority. You know what, stranger? Jake said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I think you're all talk. I think you're just another washed-up has-been trying to live off old stories. I bet that gun of yours ain't even loaded. Thomas smiled for the first time since the conversation started, but it wasn't a friendly smile. Well, now, that's an interesting theory. You want to test it out? The challenge hung in the air between them like smoke from a campfire. Everyone watching knew they had reached the point where words weren't going to solve anything. Someone was going to have to make a move. And it was going to happen soon. Rebecca found herself stepping back without thinking about it. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She had never seen a real gunfight before, had never even imagined she would be caught in the middle of one. All those dime novels she had read back in Boston hadn't prepared her for how terrifying this moment would actually feel. Here's what's going to happen, Thomas said, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. I'm going to count to 3. When I reach 3, you boys are going to let go of Miss Carter and step back. If you don't, well, I reckon we'll find out how good my aim still is. Boole looked to Jake for guidance. This wasn't going the way any of them had expected. They had grabbed plenty of women before, and nobody had ever challenged them like this. Most folks in Cedar Ridge were too scared to even make eye contact with them, let alone stand up to them in the middle of the street. You're making a big mistake, mister, Jake said, but his voice had lost most of its confidence. Boole and me, we've been in more fights than you can count. We didn't get our reputation by backing down from nobody. I'm sure you didn't, Thomas agreed. But there's a difference between fighting scared shopkeepers and facing someone who knows what he's doing, a big difference. Thomas took a step closer, and Rebecca noticed that his whole body language had changed. The relaxed, easygoing cowboy was gone, replaced by something much more dangerous. His hand hovered near his gun, not touching it, but ready to move faster than lightning if he needed. 1, Thomas said clearly. Jake's hand twitched toward his own weapon, but he hesitated. Something about the way Thomas was standing, the way he held himself, suggested this wasn't going to be the easy fight Jake had imagined. This man had the look of someone who had faced death before and wasn't particularly worried about facing it again. Boole was sweating now, despite the late afternoon heat. His grip on Rebecca's arm had loosened without him realizing it. He kept looking back and forth between Thomas and Jake, waiting for someone to tell him what to do. 2, Thomas continued, his voice never changing tone. The street had gone completely silent. Even the horses tied up outside the saloon seemed to sense the tension and had stopped moving around. Rebecca could hear her own breathing, could smell the dust and sweat and fear that filled the air around them. Jake made his decision. His pride wouldn't let him back down in front of the whole town, not after all the tough talk. His hand moved toward his gun, not fast but with clear intent. He figured if he could get Thomas talking again, maybe distract him for just a second, he might have a chance. Now hold on there, Ranger, Jake said, trying to sound reasonable. Maybe we can work something out. Maybe there's a way for everybody to walk away happy. But Thomas had seen this trick before. Too many times to count. The fake surrender, the plea for mercy, followed by a desperate grab for a weapon when the other man's guard was down. It was the oldest play in the book, and it only worked on greenhorns who didn't know any better. 3, Thomas said. What happened? Next was so fast that most of the people watching couldn't follow it all. Jake's hand shot toward his gun, trying to clear leather before Thomas could react. At the same time, Boole let go of Rebecca and lunged forward with his massive fists, hoping to tackle the former ranger before he could draw. But Thomas Cole hadn't survived years as a Texas Ranger by being slow or unprepared. His gun appeared in his hand like magic, drawn and cocked before Jake's weapon had even cleared its holster. He sidestepped Bull's charge with the grace of a dancer, letting the big man's momentum carry him past. "I wouldn't," Thomas said quietly. His gun now pointed directly at Jake's chest. Jake froze with his pistol halfway out of its leather home. Bull stumbled and nearly fell, caught off balance by missing his target. Both men suddenly realized they had made a terrible mistake. They weren't facing some lucky drifter or an over-the-hill has-been. They were facing a professional, someone who had spent years learning how to stay alive in situations exactly like this one. "Now," Thomas said, his voice still calm but carrying an edge of steel, "I believe I asked you gentlemen to let the lady go. Are you going to do that, or do we need to take this conversation a little further?" Rebecca stared in amazement. In the space of a few seconds, the entire situation had completely reversed itself. Jake and Bull, who had seemed so dangerous and unstoppable just moments before, now looked like what they really were, two bullies who had finally met someone they couldn't intimidate. The moment of truth had arrived, and everyone in Cedar Ridge was about to find out what Jake Morrison and Bull Henley were really made of. Jake stood frozen like a statue, his gun halfway out of its holster. Sweat was running down his face, and his hand was shaking so badly that everyone could see it. He had always been fast enough to beat the drunks and scared shopkeepers he usually picked fights with, but this was completely different. Thomas Cole's gun was already pointed at his chest, steady as a rock. "Easy now," Thomas said in that same calm voice. "No need for anyone to do anything stupid. Just slowly move your hand away from that gun and put it up where I can see it." Jake's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. All his tough talk from a few minutes ago seemed to have dried up completely. He had built his reputation in Cedar Ridge by being the meanest, fastest gun around, but now everyone could see he wasn't nearly as tough as he pretended to be. Bull was still trying to catch his balance after missing his charge. The big man turned around slowly, his face red with embarrassment and anger. He had never missed a tackle before, had never met anyone quick enough to step out of his way like that. Thomas had made it look as easy as avoiding a slow-moving cow. "This ain't over," Bull growled, but his voice didn't carry the same confidence it had before. "You got lucky, that's all." Thomas smiled slightly, still keeping his gun trained on Jake. "Lucky? Son, I've been in more scrapes than you've had hot meals. What just happened wasn't luck. It was practice, lots and lots of practice." Rebecca couldn't believe what she was seeing. A few minutes ago, these two men had seemed like unstoppable forces of nature. Now they looked like schoolboys who had been caught stealing apples from the neighbor's tree. Thomas hadn't even broken a sweat. "Now," Thomas continued, "I'm going to say this one more time, and I want you both to listen real careful. The lady doesn't want to go with you. She's made that clear as mountain water. So you're going to let her walk away, and you're going to do it right now." Jake finally found his voice, though it came out as more of a squeak than the threatening growl he was going for. "You can't watch her all the time, stranger. You won't always be around to protect her. Is that a threat?" Thomas asked, and suddenly his voice got a lot colder. No, Jake said quickly, realizing he had made another mistake. "I just meant things happen in a town like this. Accidents, you know?" Thomas took a step closer, and Jake automatically stepped back. "Let me tell you something about accidents. In my experience, they tend to happen a lot more often to men who go around threatening innocent ladies. Funny how that works out." Bull was still angry about being made to look like a fool, but even he could see that this fight was over. Thomas had proven he was faster, smarter, and calmer under pressure. Continuing to push would only make things worse for them. "Come on, Jake," Bull said quietly. "Let's just get out of here." But Jake's pride was still stinging. He had spent years building up his reputation as the toughest man in Cedar Ridge, and now it was crumbling in front of everyone. People were watching from windows and doorways, seeing him back down from a stranger. The stories would spread through the whole town before sunset. "This ain't right," Jake said, though he still hadn't moved his hand toward his gun. "We was here first. We found her first." "Found her?" Thomas repeated, his eyebrows going up. She's not a lost cow, you fool. She's an educated lady who came here to teach children. Show some respect. Rebecca felt a warm glow in her chest. Nobody had ever defended her like this before. Back in Boston, she had always been just another young woman trying to make her own way in the world. Here, Thomas was treating her like she was someone important, someone worth fighting for. Besides, Thomas added, seems to me like the only thing you boys found was trouble. And now you need to decide if you want to find a whole lot more of it. The threat was clear, and even Jake wasn't foolish enough to miss it. He slowly moved his hand away from his gun and raised both hands up to shoulder height. His face was bright red with embarrassment, but he was finally ready to admit defeat. Fine, Jake said through gritted teeth. We'll let her go, but this ain't over between us, stranger. Not by a long shot, Thomas nodded slightly. I figured you might feel that way. That's why I want to make sure we understand each other real clear. Miss Carter is under my protection now. Anyone who bothers her is going to have to deal with me. And next time, I might not be in such a friendly mood. Bull helped Jake straighten up, and both men started backing away toward the saloon. They moved slowly, keeping their hands visible, not wanting to give Thomas any reason to think they were planning something sneaky. You made a big mistake today, Jake called out when he was a safe distance away. This is our town, and we don't forget when someone makes us look bad. Neither do I, Thomas replied calmly. And I got a real good memory. The two troublemakers disappeared through the swinging doors of the Silver Dollar Saloon, probably to drink away their embarrassment and plan their next move. Thomas watched them go, then slowly holstered his gun with the same smooth motion he had used to draw at Rebecca realized she had been holding her breath for the last several minutes. Now that the immediate danger was over, she felt weak in the knees and had to steady herself against a nearby post. The whole confrontation had lasted only a few minutes, but it felt like hours. You all right, miss? Thomas asked, turning his attention to her for the first time since the standoff had begun. I think so, Rebecca said, though her voice was still shaking. I can't believe what just happened. I can't believe you stood up to them like that. Thomas tipped his hat politely. Wasn't nothing any decent man wouldn't do? Those boys needed to learn some manners, and sometimes the only way to teach bullies is to show them what it feels like to be on the receiving end. People were starting to come out of their hiding places now that the excitement was over. Rebecca could see shopkeepers opening their doors and neighbors stepping out onto their porches. Everyone was looking at Thomas with expressions of amazement and gratitude. I don't know how to thank you, Rebecca said. If you hadn't come along when you did ... Don't need to thank me, Thomas said. Just doing what's right. Though I got to say, you showed real courage standing up to them for as long as you did. Not many folks would have kept fighting like that. Rebecca felt her cheeks turn pink at the compliment. I was terrified the whole time. I didn't know what I was going to do. Being scared don't make you weak, Thomas told her. It's what you do when you're scared that shows what kind of person you really are, and you didn't give up, even when things looked hopeless. That takes real strength. As they talked, Rebecca noticed that the scattered papers from her teaching credentials were still blowing around in the dust. Thomas saw her looking and immediately started gathering them up, treating each document with the same care he might show a valuable treasure. Can't have the new schoolteacher losing her important papers, he said with a smile. The children in this town are going to need all the education they can get. Thomas handed Rebecca the last of her scattered papers, making sure each one was clean and undamaged. As she took them, their hands touched briefly, and she felt a little spark of something she couldn't quite name. He had strong hands, weathered from years of hard work, but gentle when they needed to be. Thank you, she said softly. These papers are everything to me. Without them, I can't prove I'm qualified to teach. Well, we sure can't have that, Thomas replied with a warm smile. This town needs a good teacher more than just about anything. Else, most of these kids have never seen the inside of a real schoolhouse. As they stood there talking, people began approaching them cautiously. An older woman with gray hair and a kind face was the first to come over. She wore a clean apron over her simple dress and had flour on her hands like she had been baking. When the commotion started, Miss Carter, the woman said hesitantly, "I'm Margaret Henderson. I run the boarding house where you'll be staying. I'm so sorry about what happened to you. Jake Morrison and Bull Henley have been causing trouble in this town for far too long." Rebecca felt a wave of relief wash over her. Finally, someone in Cedar Ridge was treating her like a welcome guest instead of a target. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm so glad to meet you. I was starting to wonder if I'd made a terrible mistake coming here." "Oh, don't you worry about that," Mrs. Henderson said, shooting a dark look toward the saloon. "Most folks in this town are good, decent people. It's just that some of us haven't had the courage to stand up to men like Jake and Bull. We should be ashamed of ourselves for letting it go on this long." Thomas tipped his hat to Mrs. Henderson. "Ma'am, I'm Thomas Cole. I was wondering if you might have a room available for a few days. I was planning to move on, but I think I might stick around Cedar Ridge a little longer than expected. Double quotes. Mrs. Henderson's eyes lit up. "Mr. Cole, after what you just did for Miss Carter, you can stay as long as you like. And the first week is on the house. It's the least I can do to thank you for having the backbone to do what the rest of us should have done years ago." More townspeople were gathering now, and Rebecca was surprised to see how many of them looked relieved and grateful. A tall man with a blacksmith's muscled arm stepped forward and shook Thomas's hand vigorously. "Name's Henry Wilson," the blacksmith said. "I run the forge down the street. I can't tell you how good it felt to see someone finally put Jake Morrison in his place. That man has been terrorizing this town for too long. Why didn't anyone stand up to him before?" Rebecca asked, genuinely curious. Henry looked embarrassed. "Jake's got friends, miss. Rough friends who ride with him sometimes. And Bull's put more than one man in the doctor's office over the years. Most of us got families to think about. We couldn't risk getting hurt and leaving our wives and children with no one to provide for them." Thomas nodded understandingly. "Can't blame a man for looking out for his family. That's what any good man would do. But sometimes situations reach a point where someone has to take a stand, family or no family." A younger man with ink stains on his fingers approached the group. "I'm David Mitchell. I run the newspaper here. Mr. Cole, would you mind if I wrote a story about what happened today? People in the surrounding towns should know that Cedar Ridge is getting back its backbone. I'd rather you didn't make too big a deal about it," Thomas said modestly. "Just doing what needed doing. Though I suppose it might be good for folks to know that Cedar Ridge isn't going to put up with troublemakers anymore." Rebecca watched as more and more people came out to thank Thomas and welcome her to town. She was amazed at how different everyone seemed now that Jake and Bull were gone. These weren't the scared, unfriendly people she had first encountered. They were good folks who had just been living under a dark cloud for too long. "Miss Carter," said a woman with 3 young children clinging to her skirts, "I'm Anna Peterson. These are my little ones, Billy, Lucy, and Tom. They're so excited to finally have a real teacher. We've been trying to teach them ourselves, but none of us had much schooling." Rebecca knelt down to be at eye level with the children. They were clean and well cared for, but she could see the hunger for knowledge in their bright eyes. "Hello? Billy, Lucy, and Tom, I'm very excited to be your teacher. Do you know your letters yet?" "I know some," said Lucy, who looked to be about 7 years old. "Mama taught me A, B, C, and D, but she doesn't know the rest." "Well, I know all of them," Rebecca said with a smile. "And I know numbers too, and how to read stories and all sorts of interesting things. We're going to have so much fun learning." Together, the children's faces lit up with excitement, and Rebecca felt her heart warm. This was why she had come to Cedar Ridge, to give these children the education they deserved, the same chance at learning that she had been given back in Boston. Mrs. Henderson clapped her hands together. "Speaking of which, Miss Carter, we should get you settled in your room so you can rest up from your journey. And Mr. Cole, I'll show you to your room as well. I imagine you're both tired after all this excitement." As the crowd began to disperse, Thomas fell into step beside Rebecca as they walked toward the boarding house. She noticed he kept glancing back toward the saloon, staying alert even though the immediate danger had passed. "Are you really planning to stay in town for a while?" Rebecca asked. "I mean, I don't want to keep you from whatever business brought you here." Thomas was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to answer. "Truth is, I was just passing through. Been driving cattle from ranch to ranch, making enough money to keep moving. But sometimes a man comes to a place where he feels like he might be needed. And you feel needed here? Well, those two in the saloon made it pretty clear they're not done causing trouble, and you're going to need time to get established as the teacher. Seems like it might be good to have someone around who knows how to handle difficult situations." Rebecca felt that warm glow in her chest again. "I can't ask you to change your whole life just to protect me. That wouldn't be fair." "You're not asking," Thomas pointed out. "I'm offering. Big difference. Besides, I've been moving around for so long, I almost forgot what it feels like to be part of a community. Might be nice to stay in one place for a while." They had reached the boarding house, a 2-story building with a welcoming front porch and flower boxes in the windows. Mrs. Henderson was already bustling around, preparing rooms and planning a proper welcome dinner for both her new guests. "You know," Rebecca said as they climbed the front steps, "I came here thinking I was going to teach these children, but I think I might end up learning just as much from all of you." Thomas smiled. "That's usually how it works in small towns. Miss Carter, everyone teaches everyone else. That's what makes a place like this special." As they went inside, neither of them noticed the 2 figures watching from the shadows beside the saloon. Jake and Boole hadn't given up. They were just waiting for the right moment to make their next move. 3 weeks had passed since that first day in Cedar Ridge, and Rebecca could hardly believe how much her life had changed. Every morning, she woke up in her comfortable room at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house and walked the short distance to the old building that the town had cleaned up to serve as their schoolhouse. The children were eager students, hungry for knowledge in a way that broke her heart and filled it with joy at the same time. Little Lucy Peterson could now recite the entire alphabet and was starting to read simple words. Billy, her older brother, had turned out to have a natural talent for numbers and could already do basic arithmetic in his head, but it wasn't just the children who were learning. The whole town seemed to be waking up from a long, bad dream. People walked the streets with their heads held high now. Shopkeepers left their doors open during the day instead of keeping them locked. Women felt safe running errands by themselves, and through it all, Thomas had been there. True to his word, he had stayed in Cedar Ridge and found ways to make himself useful. During the day, he helped Henry Wilson at the blacksmith shop, learning to repair tools and shoe horses. In the evenings, he would often stop by the schoolhouse to help Rebecca prepare lessons or fix anything that needed fixing. The two of them had fallen into an easy friendship that felt natural and comfortable. Thomas would tell her stories about his years as a Texas Ranger, and she would share her dreams of giving these children the best education possible. Sometimes they would sit on the front porch of the boarding house after dinner, watching the sunset and talking about anything and everything. Mrs. Henderson had taken to humming cheerful songs while she cooked, clearly pleased with how things were developing between her 2 favorite boarders. "Those 2 are perfect for each other," she would tell anyone who would listen. "Just need a little more time to figure it out themselves." But not everyone in Cedar Ridge was happy with the changes. Jake Morrison and Boole Henley had been keeping a low profile since their confrontation with Thomas, but they hadn't left town. They spent most of their time in the Silver Dollar Saloon, drinking heavily and nursing their wounded pride. "I'm telling you, we can't let this stand," Jake said for the 100th time, slamming his empty whiskey glass down on the bar. "That stranger made us look like fools in front of the whole town. People are starting to think they don't have to listen to us anymore." Boole nodded, his small eyes filled with resentment. "I heard Henry Wilson talking to his wife yesterday. He said he was proud that someone finally stood up to us. Proud like we was some kind of disease that needed curing." The bartender, a nervous man named Pete, who had always been afraid of Jake and Boole, tried to stay out of their conversation. But he couldn't help overhearing their angry mutterings, and it worried him. These 2 had caused enough trouble already. Maybe you boys should think about moving on to another town, Pete suggested quietly. Start fresh somewhere else where people don't know about recent events. Jake's eyes went dark with anger. Are you trying to get rid of us, Pete? After all the money we've spent in this place over the years? No, no, Pete said quickly, realizing he had made a mistake. I just thought maybe a change of scenery might be good for everyone. The only change that's going to be good for everyone, Jake said slowly, is when that interfering stranger learns to mind his own business, permanently. Meanwhile, Rebecca was having the best day she had experienced. Since arriving in Cedar Ridge, her students had all successfully read their first complete sentences, and she was so proud of them she felt like her heart might burst. She decided to celebrate by baking cookies for everyone. Using Mrs. Henderson's kitchen, Thomas found her there an hour later, flour in her hair and a big smile on her face. Something smells mighty good in here, he said, hanging his hat on a hook by the door. I'm making cookies for the children, Rebecca said happily. They worked so hard today and I wanted to do something special for them. Would you like to try one? They're almost ready. Thomas sat down at the kitchen table and watched her work. She moved with such grace and purpose, humming softly to herself as she checked the oven. He had never met anyone quite like her, strong enough to stand up to bullies, gentle enough to love children who weren't even her own, and smart enough to make him feel like he could be a better man than he had ever imagined. Rebecca, he said suddenly, then stopped. She looked up from the cookies, noting the serious tone in his voice. What is it, Thomas? I've been thinking about something and I wanted to talk to you about it. It's about Jake and Boole. Rebecca's happy expression faded slightly. She had been hoping those two had given up and would leave her alone from now on. What about them? They haven't caused any more trouble lately, but that doesn't mean they've given up. Men like that don't just forget when someone embarrasses them. They wait and they plan, and then they try to get even when you least expect it. You think they're planning something? Thomas nodded grimly. I know they are. I've seen their type before during my ranger days. They're spending too much time in that saloon, drinking and talking angry. That's usually a bad sign. Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine. Just when everything had been going so well, the shadow of those awful men was falling over her happiness again. What do you think we should do? I think you should be extra careful for a while. Don't go anywhere alone, especially not after dark. And if you see them coming, get inside somewhere public right away. Don't try to face them by yourself. What? About you? Rebecca asked, suddenly worried. If they're planning something, you might be in just as much danger as I am. Maybe more, since you're the one who humiliated them. Thomas smiled, touched by her concern for his safety. Don't worry. About me, I can take care of myself. It's you I'm worried about. You're the reason they're angry, and you're the one they'll want to hurt. Rebecca turned back to her cookies, but the joy had gone out of her baking. I came here to teach children and help this community. I never wanted to bring trouble to anyone. You didn't bring trouble? Thomas said firmly. The trouble was already here. You just gave people hope that things could be different. That's not a bad thing, Rebecca. That's a wonderful thing. She pulled the cookies out of the oven and set them on the counter to cool. They smelled delicious, but she no longer felt like celebrating. I just wish those men would leave town and let everyone live in peace. They might, Thomas said. Sometimes bullies do give up and move on when they realize they can't win, but we need to be prepared in case they don't. As if his words had summoned them, they heard loud voices outside on the street. Thomas moved quickly to the window and looked out, his hand automatically moving toward his gun. What he saw made his blood run cold. Jake Morrison and Boole Henley were walking down the main street, clearly drunk and looking for trouble, and they were heading straight toward the boarding house. Thomas moved away from the window and grabbed his hat. Rebecca, I need you to go upstairs and stay there until I tell you it's safe to come down. What's happening? She asked, but she could already see the worry in his eyes. Jake and Boole are coming this way, and they've been drinking. That's never a good combination with men like them. Thomas checked his gun to make sure it was loaded and ready. Please just do as I ask. I don't want you to get caught in the middle of whatever they're planning." Rebecca nodded, understanding the seriousness in his voice. But as she started toward the stairs, Mrs. Henderson came bustling into the kitchen from the front parlor, her face pale with concern. "Mr. Cole," she said breathlessly, "there's a crowd gathering outside. Jake Morrison is shouting something about wanting to talk to you. He sounds very drunk and very angry." Thomas sighed. He had hoped those two would have the sense to leave town by now, but it looked like they were determined to settle their wounded pride once and for all. "Mrs. Henderson, please make sure all the doors are locked and keep everyone inside. This might get ugly." Through the window they could hear Jake's voice getting louder and more belligerent. "Thomas Cole, we know you're in there. Come on out and face us like a man. We got some unfinished business with you, stranger." Bull's voice joined in. "You made us look bad in front of the whole town, and now it's time to pay for that." Thomas looked at Rebecca one more time. "Promise me you'll stay inside no matter what happens out there." "I promise," she said, though her heart was racing with fear for his safety. "But Thomas, please be careful. These men are dangerous, and they have nothing left to lose." "I know," he said softly. "But sometimes a man has to do what's right, even when it's dangerous. That's what separates the good folks from the bad ones." He walked to the front door and paused for a moment, gathering himself. Then he opened it and stepped out onto the porch, his hands hanging loose and ready at his sides. Jake and Bull were standing in the middle of the street, swaying slightly from all the whiskey they had consumed. Behind them, a small crowd of curious townspeople had gathered at a safe distance, wanting to see what would happen but smart enough to stay out of the line of fire. "Well, well," Jake said with a nasty grin. "Look who finally decided to show." His face thought you might try to hide behind a woman's skirts. "I'm here," Thomas said simply. "What do you want?" "What do we want?" Bull laughed harshly. "We want you to get out of our town and never come back. We want things to go back to the way they were before you showed up and ruined everything." Thomas shook his head. "Things were never good the way they were. You boys were terrorizing innocent folks, and that's never right." "Those folks needed to know their place," Jake snarled. "We kept order in this town. We made sure everyone knew who was in charge." "That wasn't order," Thomas replied calmly. "That was just fear, and fear isn't the same thing as respect." From her window upstairs, Rebecca watched the confrontation. With her heart in her throat, she could see how drunk and unpredictable Jake and Bull were, and she was terrified that Thomas might get hurt trying to protect her and the town down in the street. Jake was getting more agitated by the minute. "You think you're so much better than us, don't you? With your fancy gun and your ranger stories? Well, let me tell you something, Mr. High and Mighty. This time things are going to be different." "How's that?" Thomas asked, though he was already watching their hands, ready for trouble. "This time we're ready for you," Bull said, his hand moving toward his gun. "This time we know what kind of snake we're dealing with." Thomas could see this was going to end in gunplay, just like he had feared, but he also knew he couldn't back down now. Too many people were counting on him to keep them safe. Rebecca, Mrs. Henderson, the children at the school, all the good folks who had finally found the courage to hope for something better. "I'm going to give you boys one last chance," Thomas said clearly, his voice carrying across the street so everyone could hear. "Walk away right now, and nobody has to get hurt. Keep pushing, and I can't promise things will work out well for you." Jake laughed, but it was a mean sound with no humor in it. "You hear that, Bull? He's threatening us. In our own town, he's threatening us." "I hear it," Bull said, flexing his big hands, "and I don't like it one bit." The crowd of townspeople had grown larger, with more and more folks coming out to see what all the shouting was about. Henry Wilson was there with his wife. David Mitchell had his notebook ready to record whatever happened, and Anna Peterson was peeking around the corner with her children safely behind her. "All right then," Jake said, his hand moving toward his gun. "If that's how you want to play it, stranger. But this time there's two of us and only one of you. Let's see how fast you really are." What happened next took place in the span of just a few heartbeats, but it felt like slow motion to everyone watching. Jake and Bull both went for their guns at the same time, trying to overwhelm Thomas with sheer numbers, but Thomas Cole hadn't survived all those years as a Texas Ranger by being slow or unlucky. His gun appeared in his hand like magic, faster than either of his opponents could follow. His first shot caught Jake in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his gun flying into the dust. His second shot hit Bull in the leg, dropping the big man like a sack of grain. Both troublemakers were down and disarmed before either of them had managed to fire a single shot. The street erupted in cheers from the townspeople, who had finally seen justice done to the men who had terrorized them for so long. Thomas kept his gun drawn until he was sure both men were no longer a threat. Then he walked over to where they lay groaning in the dirt, making sure their weapons were well out of reach. "I told you boys this wouldn't end well for you," he said quietly. "Now you got a choice. You can let Doc Patterson patch you up and then leave town forever. Or you can stay and see what happens when the territorial marshal hears about two men trying to ambush a former ranger." Jake was clutching his wounded shoulder, his face pale with pain and shock. All his earlier bravado had evaporated like morning mist. "We'll leave," he gasped. "Just get us to the doctor." Bull nodded weakly from where he lay in the street. "We're done with Cedar Ridge. This place ain't worth the trouble." As Henry Wilson and some other men helped carry the wounded troublemakers to the doctor's office, Thomas looked up at the boarding house and saw Rebecca watching from the window. Their eyes met across the distance, and he tipped his hat to her with a smile. Later that evening, after Jake and Bull had been bandaged up and escorted to the edge of town with strict orders never to return, Thomas found Rebecca sitting on the front porch of the boarding house. She was holding a cup of tea and looking up at the stars. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. "I was hoping you would," she said softly. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the peaceful sounds of the town settling down for the night. Finally, Rebecca spoke. "Thomas, I've been thinking about what you said before, about how this place feels like somewhere you could belong." "I remember." "Well, I was wondering if you might consider staying permanently. Not just to protect me, but because this town needs good men like you. And because ... double quotes, she paused, suddenly shy. "Because what?" Thomas asked gently. "Because I think I'm falling in love with you," she said, her cheeks turning pink even in the moonlight. Thomas smiled and took her hand in his. "Well, Miss Rebecca Carter, I think that works out just fine. Because I've been falling in love with you since the day I met you." 6 months later, on a beautiful spring morning, the whole town of Cedar Ridge gathered to watch Thomas Cole and Rebecca Carter get married in the same schoolhouse where she taught their children. And they all lived happily ever after, just like in the best stories.